What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk to Paul Franz. He's an expert at mapping and graphics and all things multimedia. So he's worked at CSIS and he's been a fellow at International Crisis Group. And I'm going to let him take away and show us what can be done with satellite imagery.
Yeah, that's
Paul,
right.
welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I think it's really exciting to see how video storytelling has emerged in the past decade or so because, when you and I were studying in Miami in 2010, none of us could have possibly imagined that this is where video was going to go. We were thinking that we're going to be cinematographers and only using cameras, but the wide adaptation of freely available satellite imagery has just been really groundbreaking for telling global stories. And you can see that you're not always going to have access in high kinetic places of war or conflict. And what satellite imagery is able to do, and we've seen time and time again, that it is able to tell us a visual narrative without necessarily risking people on the ground. Or, if we just need to analyze a story from a different angle, in my case, I've done it in a lot of military contexts, it really is a really great base in which to ground and orient a story around. And so today we're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about how you can get satellite imagery for free and integrate that into your storytelling projects, whether that's just a blog post with static images, or if you're an advanced user, you like doing video maps, and integrate that into a GeoLayers project. So I'm going to show everybody some really cool examples we've been working with at International Crisis Group. Crisis Group, for those who don't know, it's dedicated to peace and conflict resolution around the world, ending war for all time. And one of its big components of research is focused on climate change and conflict. We look at places in Africa, South Sudan, the Horn of Africa, and seeing how climate change is actually affecting levels of violence and conflict. And the more extreme weather becomes, and the more extreme that we see high seasons of drought, high seasons of flooding in both directions, we see that there's more fighting, there's more violence, there's more fatalities. So what I'm showing you now is a project on South Sudan that we did. And one of the biggest projects in Africa right now is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And so this was a really tailor-made use case for telling a story with satellite imagery. And so you can see here, this is the dam, but it's only partially constructed. And so we have a nice little 3D turntable. We're using Mapbox's elevation data to really make this scene pop a little bit. And you can see that once this thing turns around, you see that the water is starting to form up. They're trying to block the water and build up the dam vertically. And so one of the challenges that we wanted to do here, or solve here, was what happened when a dam was actually complete. And so unfortunately, out of the box, Mapbox and Google, they have old data. Their imagery is from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, before the dam was actually completed. So this is the most recent image that you can get from those commercial providers. And so one of the greatest resources that's out there that lets you do a lot of very fine searches around the date of satellite imagery. You can get specific dates of satellite imagery throughout many different years. So we looked at the Sentinel-2 constellation, which is run by NASA. So check this out. We transition, and using NASA's data, we can see a transition from the dam in progress to completion. And you can see on the screen now, there's this great, huge water basin where the water has been dammed up. And so what you're looking at from Sentinel is something that we call a 5-meter resolution image. And what that means is that for every pixel on this screen is representative of 5 meters in real life. So this imagery is great for tracking ecological and in some cases, some battle damage, but it has to be very far out. You can't be zooming in and seeing the specific details of things like a guard tower or a tank or a missile silo or anything like that. So let's check it out. Let's go take a look at the Sentinel-2 constellation. So the European Space Agency provides a really nifty little browser that you can use. It's free. You can sign up for it. It's just apps.sentinel-hub.com/EO browser. And if you want to look through their catalog, it has not only optical imagery, but it has things like infrared, being able to see levels of vegetation and night lights. It's really incredible stuff. But for the purposes of our exercise today, we're just going to look at Sentinel-2, which has optical imagery, photographic imagery, more or less. And so since Ukraine is consistently in the news, unfortunately for worse, we want to look at parts of Ukraine over the past year and see specific images at certain dates during the war. So I'm going to look at March 2022, right when the war began. And we're going to go set a range from March 24th to the end of March. And we're going to look at the curious case of a Russian vessel in Berdansk that was sunk in the early days of the war by the Ukrainians. So you can see here it's a port city on the Black Sea. And we're going to pull back to, I think the vessel was sunk on the 24th, but let's see. Load more. Sentinel-2, 24th. There we go. So. There we go. So, again, 5-meter imagery, it's not so detailed because as I go into the city itself, you can see big apartment blocks, housing, the rough outline of streets, but it doesn't give you a ton of detail. But what it can do, especially in times of war, is show you big events. So this was the sinking of this Russian vessel, and the explosion was so large that the smoke could be seen for a whole day. And fortunately, the Sentinel-2 satellite was above this part of Ukraine taking the picture of it. And you can see this huge plume of smoke exiting. So the great thing about ESA is that its tool lets you export in multiple different formats. And we can go into the icons here on the right, and you can download the image based on your viewport. So we're going to go hit download. In our case, we're going to use the analytical version. And before I show you that, you can, if you're just writing a blog post and you want to associate an image with some of the text that you're writing as a reporter, you can just download a basic JPEG or a PNG file. But for our case, we're going to integrate it into a GeoLayers project. And so what we're going to need here is something called a TIFF, a GeoTIFF. And we're going to want the highest quality we can possibly get, WebMercator. And then you can see here in the middle of my screen the preview. We're going to get a nice centered photo of this attack. We're going to hit download. GeoTIFFs are very big files, but they're very detailed. And if you think of it as a photographer, the image is slightly different in the sense that the meta, instead of having things like aperture, shutter speed, and that sort of thing, the meta that's embedded in this image is the geodata. So when we put this into a map, it's going to pin itself to exactly where this location is in the world. So the image is downloaded. You can look up a lot of tutorials on how to integrate Mapbox styles with GeoLayers. I'm not going to go over that here. But what we can do is take a Mapbox style with a satellite layer on it. We're going to go hit Add New Layer, upload the data, select a file. We're going to go to my desktop, and we're going to pick that GeoTIFF that I just downloaded. We're going to hit Confirm. I'm going to let Mapbox do its magic. Do a little processing. I'll start prepping it by going down to where Burdansk is. And while we wait, Danny, any questions so far? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm wondering, when you're at the in the Sentinel data, are you able to have complete control over all your labels, the cities, the countries, and all that? I'm sure you're going to cover that in GeoLayers, but how much control do you have?
So when you download the GeoTIFF, it's not going to export anything. But if you're just looking for a simple image, you can just say, here's the JPEG. You can do show captions, map overlays, but you can disable that if you'd like. And it can just be.
And so what you're downloading is not, the TIFF is not actually downloading an image. It's just the location data that you're going to import.
And the image.
Or it's also going to give you some image, but that image is clean and editable within the Mapbox and within GeoLayers.
Yeah, and you can throw it into Illustrator, you can throw it into Photoshop, you can do whatever you want.
Wow.
So the image has been processed. We're going to bring that in. And you can see already there's a little postage stamp right in the center of my screen. And we're going to go back to style. Now you can see this image is now in the right location and integrated with our layer. And so you can move it around, you can check it out. And to be sure, you can disable it just to see. Here's our before, after.
Wow. Fantastic.
So we have our style. It's very basic styling. Mapbox gives you some controls over what you can do. Not a lot, but for the sake of what you're doing here, you don't really need to do that. You can always edit it in After Effects directly. You can do some things to make it a little bit even, but not a ton of things. Mapbox's tools are a little blunt in this regard. You can maybe pull the contrast out a little bit, pull up our satch, give it a little more color. The difference between Sentinel-2 and the satellites that Maxar Technologies use is that Maxar Technology satellites have they have less than a meter imagery. So every pixel you see is 50 centimeters in real life, which gives you incredible detail. And you can see definitely here, if I zoom down into here, we can see individual lots of residential homes. With Sentinel, it's not that detailed. But for the case of this story, the sinking of this Russian ship, it works.
Yeah, and Maxar, how often are they getting imagery?
So Maxar covers the world every day. I mean, you can get imagery from anything, anytime. The problem with Maxar is that very expensive. So it's not free. So we're going to go and take this style. We're going to go to Carto and copy this URL that Mapbox provides. We're going to go back into After Effects, and we're going to go create our map comp. We're going to go drag our location over to Ukraine, so we're not in a completely different part of the world. Going to hit next. And we're going to go ahead and add our Mapbox style. And we're going to paste that URL. We're going to say Burdansk ship. And we're going to hit apply. So now we're going to hit create. GeoLayers is going to do its work. It takes a little while sometimes.
So while that's loading up, I mean, how often are you using these kind of technologies in your day-to-day work?
If I had my way, I'd be doing it almost all the time. But the challenge always is that satellite imagery is a tool. It's not always, you can't force it on every situation because in some cases, cloud cover prevents you from getting a clear image on a certain day.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just, you're not going to get it. The event or whatever it was too small or it was inside. You just don't know. But satellite imagery, just as a general proposition is so powerful. It is such a powerful
Yeah,
storytelling tool.
it's incredibly powerful, and we're thinking about it a lot in Myanmar, for example. There's a lot of cases where whole villages will be burned, and we use satellite to show before and after, and you can clearly see what's happened.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can see these incredible things without having to commission a photographer or risking people's lives. And you've seen it time and time again, these stories where, with the Chinese military and them building up artificial islands in the middle of the South China Sea, of course we can't send photographers out there because they're military-controlled zones, but through satellite imagery, we were able to expose and show exactly what was going on, down to the very specific construction of like missile batteries and guard towers and barracks and things like that. So now we can see, all right, now our satellite imagery layer pulled in. We see that nice imagery. We're going to hit apply. So now we're going to go zoom into Burdansk.
Okay, so right now what we're looking at is the geolators data, Mapbox, and Sentinel-2, or just Mapbox and Sentinel-2?
This is just Mapbox and Sentinel-2. So we're taking...
In terms of the visualization.
Correct. And yeah, geolayers is just the tool that we're using to bring these two things together and create a video out of it. So now you can see vaguely right here in the center of my work comp, there's that custom image. And so we're going to go ahead and we'll do like a basic zoom or something where let's start with, we'll end on this maybe. Now let's zoom in a little bit more and then do something like that. Yeah.
So you see, I also realized that you manipulated the pitch in that also. So that's all the that GeoLayers is effectively doing is matching up all the data, and it's working as a graphic interface for you to work on your angles as well, right?
The way I've explained this to motion designers is that GeoLayers works the same as After Effects. The only big difference is that instead of position, scale, rotation, anchor point, and all that stuff, it's replaced it with cartography. So instead of that, you're using latitude, longitude, zoom, bearing, and pitch. Those are the only properties that you're animating here.
Great, and that's a great point, because you can put in a direct lat and longitude data, and it'll go exactly to where you where you want to be, right?
Yeah. So what I'm doing here is just keyframing my end state. I want the animation to end right about here. And I'm just going to go back to all these, keyframe my latitude, longitude, zoom, bearing, and pitch. And I'm just going to zoom out, give this a little bit of a regional view. You can specify these with just, specific numbers if you want, but I'm being lazy and using the graphical interface here. So have a nice view of Crimea and Ukraine. And let's put a little natural tweening there. Just put that in. And let's go ahead and finalize. It's a simple animation, nothing too complicated. But this really gets to show you the power of custom satellite imagery.
Yeah, and that's looking nice in terms of the it's Mapbox that's giving that realistic satellite imagery. That's not GeoLayers, right?
That's not GeoLayers. So Mapbox has an agreement with Maxar that gives them a fairly up-to-date global layer of satellite imagery.
And that's also a non-copyright.
Yes, you can use this. Right? It's fine. With GeoLayers, I'm sure you've noticed that by default, it will give you an attribution on the bottom left of the screen. That covers the use case. Yeah, satellite imagery is really large. I mean, it's super detailed imagery. So you can see already, I'm on a fiber internet connection at home, and it's taking a little while for this to finish up because it's a lot.
Right. Yeah, because it's downloading tile by tile, and then it's going to place it in space, right?
Precisely.
So GeoLayers has its own styles, but it doesn't have anything, I don't think, that is as realistic or photorealistic looking as Mapbox. So is that one of the reasons why you're using Mapbox in this example?
So the reason I'm using Mapbox in this example is that there's no better way, that at least I know of, to integrate geotiffs with a map layer like this. There's no other tool. I think MapTiler does it too, and MapTiler has a partnership with GeoLayers. But the problem is that Mapbox does GeoTIFF integration for free, So you just saw earlier, I just downloaded the GeoTIFF from Sentinel-2, uploaded it to Mapbox, integrated it with my base layer, and then I bought that Mapbox style into GeoLayers. And so both of those now are part of my map style.
So and so you wouldn't have been able to take Sentinel-2 into GeoLayers directly. You have to have Mapbox in between.
Yes. And you'll find that it's especially useful if you're doing the 3D landscape feature of GeoLayers, because then that satellite image actually gets draped over the elevation, so it's being skinned properly. So a lot of the work that I did in Washington was we were able to get imagery of places like North Korean missile bases, Iranian irregular militia training camps, and we wanted to be able to tell a video briefing out of that. And what GeoLayers permitted me to do was take that imagery that we were getting from our researcher and analysts and then integrate that into a base layer. And then they could talk to what they were seeing, and then I could animate around the narrative that they were telling.
This is all a part of visual storytelling. That's what we're doing. We're storytellers.
Exactly.
Whether it's in journalism, in NGO work, in think tanks, be able to easily disseminate the information at a visual style, whether it's on video or satellite imagery. And this right now is a powerful tool that you're using.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just opened up a whole new world of material that we can access. I mean, we couldn't have even imagined this 13 years ago. The fact, and this is where everything is really going with visual storytelling, is that everything is kind of merging together now. I mean, it's just remarkable that, like, I really feel that, and I strongly believe this, that map video has become its own genre. It's its own medium.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's only possible because the access to satellite imagery has been so democratized. We have amazing tools like GeoLayers and After Effects now, which are able to process these things. I mean, the hardware is caught up, the software is caught up, and then on top of that, we actually have the material. We have the substance to work with.
Exactly. I mean, I was realizing that when I was in GeoLayers last, that just the speed of rendering it's not even comparable to when I was using it heavily. Maybe 8 years ago, I was using After Effects heavily, but just the render time, it was not even a tenth of what it is now. It's just quick. You need to make moves, and it renders pretty quick now.
Yeah. Back in our day, buddy, we were spending hours and hours transcoding footage by hand to ProRes 422 so it could be edited in Final Cut 7.
We were indeed.
So we're letting this render out. I put on motion blur because I love motion blur on zooms. I have no self-control over this.
No, motion blur all day. So, and the motion blur you're doing right now is within After Effects, right?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, no. Well, yes, it is processed.
You're just toggling a setting. It's not an after. I mean, it's not an additional effect added. It's just within the control panel. You're the comp panel, right?
Yes, GeoLayers. There's a feature that says enable motion imagery blur, and you click it on, and then you get this nice, sweet, like we're doing the Tom Clancy zoom to, or the Call of Duty zoom down to ground level stuff. It's terrific. Really adds a little bit of zing to your comp.
Yeah.
And so we're almost to our landing site. Of course, I'm running Zoom, I'm running After Effects, and I'm running my screen recorder all the while I'm talking to you.
Sure.
All right, check this out. Then we get a nice little zoom down to our ship here. And if you zoom in enough, you hardly notice that this is postage stamped. You could zoom in a little bit more. You can also do some kind of post effects where you just draw a border around this, so it kind of looks like, yeah, it's intentional rather than an accident.
Right. Sure.
And then you can add things like, put in like a little box around this, and you can see some of my previous work where I kind of use like fake UI elements to really pop these things of interest out to the viewer. So yeah,
okay, awesome.
That's
that
custom
great,
imagery
in
a nutshell.
That looks fantastic.
And not nearly enough people are using this technique, but it definitely gives you a little bit extra, because even
look at that. That looks fantastic. And you've been doing this for so long that it's very fluid, and it's taken you, maybe the better part of 10 minutes
Yeah.
to create a fantastic visual.
Yeah, that's right. And you can only take it in any creative direction that Adobe After Effects lets you do at that point, because then you can do all kinds of compositing. You can do like a nice camera blur that would just, tilt shift this out. So you're only focusing on our point of interest in the center here. Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting stuff.
So where do you see all this going in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is, I know it sounds cliche, it sounds corporate, but there's going to be a lot we're going to see from artificial intelligence and machine learning models. And I can give you a concrete example of where this might go.
Yeah, please.
We did a study in D.C. About ships transiting the South China Sea. The rub of this is most Chinese ships are irregular. They do not have AIS transponders, which is the globally accepted standard for telling other ships in the water your heading, your direction, your speed. They turn those off because they use their navy to harass other countries in the South China Sea, usually commercial fishermen, prospectors looking for oil and gas. And so we did a study where we said, well, like, how many ships are actually there? Because we didn't have good data. And one of the things that we did was develop a profile of what a Chinese ship would look like. And when I say profile, I mean, what kind of light does it reflect? When it's at night, it has a certain profile of light. And so we could feed that profile into this AI, which could say, okay, it looks at thousands of satellite images all at the same time and says, that pinprick of light there, that's a Chinese ship, that's a Vietnamese ship, that's a Chinese one. And then you could see through that analysis that would take years with just human eyes. It takes, days, weeks with a computer and all the processing power it can muster to say, this is how many ships there were, by just examining this model of light that we fed it and then giving it all of these images at night that it could analyze. So you're going to see incredible data journalism come of this.
Well, absolutely.
So that's the big next
Fantastic.
frontier. I think,
Yeah.
I think right now map video's still underutilized. You've got a few independent artists who are really good at it. You've got, of course, our mutual friend Boone, and also Sam Ellis at Vox News, who's doing some great work with this.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see a bit of it, and I got interested in GeoLayer specifically in my latest project. But before, we've been using just Maxar and regular satellite imagery. But now, to be able to really add animations, proper zooms, and more photorealistic imagery is what's really exciting me about these maps now. And I'm going to start implementing them a lot more in our projects.
Yeah, it's a whole new frontier. And so you can see...
So what is this we're looking at now here?
So this was one of my recent scrollytelling pieces that I did with International Crisis Group. And this uses satellite imagery. So this is an interactive. It's built with Mapbox.js. But you can see, this is why I brought up the Berdansk example, is that I used it in a very similar context. And in this case, it's part of an interactive map rather than a pre-rendered video.
Good. So as you're scrolling, you're able to come in, zoom out, and zoom in, and zoom out, right?
So we scroll through this, and there's going to be another great example in Iran after this slide. We can see the Evin prison, the infamous prison where a lot of Iranian dissidents were sent last year during the protests and the riots. This happens to be the default layer of satellite imagery that Mapbox provides, but you can see that this is really highly detailed, and it's still relevant, and it's still accurate that we can show it. So this particular project, it goes all over the world. What we were trying to do here was talk about the 10 top conflicts to watch in 2023. We have Ethiopia, we have the DRC.
And Mapbox is also
This
you're
is
saying
all
per pixel
Mapbox
is 5
powered.
meters?
Yeah, this is all Mapbox powered. There's no pre-rendered video. There's another example in which we took a look at a French outpost in Mali. And you can see here we use this custom imagery again. And you see that little star here out in the middle of the desert?
Yep.
That was a reinforced position of trenches that the French military built, French special forces. Again, with the Sentinel-2 imagery, it's the 5 meter.
So I was about to ask. So once again, now this is Sentinel-2 integrated with Mapbox.
Yeah, correct, exactly. And then we have, of course, Haiti, which seems to be in perennial crisis. It was on crisis groups list last year as well. But again, this is just the Maxar imagery. But the resolution is just stunning with this. You can see the details of a ship here, a dock, ships leaving port. This is a fairly infamous neighborhood in Port-au-Prince. We have Pakistan, we have Taiwan. It's just all these stories that we can tell with satellite imagery and map data. Just really, if you can integrate that with great stories on the ground, you really have a complete package.
Definitely agreed. Because every visual style is going to have its positives and its limitations. So I mean, having this integrated together is exactly what we're looking for.
Yep.
To tell a complete story.
Yeah. So my work spans interactive and application design. I've been doing less geolayers recently, but I'm hoping to change that. I mean, I've had so much fun being the lead producer on this series called High Resolution when I was at CSIS. Really, I mean, it's incredible how these products have a life beyond just being compelling content on YouTube. The researchers that I produce this content for, they double it as briefings. They go to the Pentagon, they go to the White House or the executive offices, and they're showing these videos before they say a word.
All right, well, that's amazing, Paul. So where can people hear more about your work and follow you and get inspired by all the work you're doing? This is incredible stuff.
So you can follow me on Twitter at PKFranz or on LinkedIn. Just search me there. It's just Paul Franz.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Paul, and hope we'll have you back and you'll show us more awesome stuff.